Okay, so this is the Traditional Buddhist Chanting class, and we're meeting on, oh gee, what is it? It's July, or no, it's August 1st, 2023, Tuesday night. And tonight we're discussing the Heart Sutra. This is the third time that we'll be discussing the Heart Sutra. And since we're discussing the Heart Sutra, we're going to begin with chanting the Heart Sutra. And in fact, this time we're going to do the one that I did at the end of the last class. It's slightly different from the one that you may be familiar with, but I actually prefer, well, anyway. So I'm just going to do it. It goes pretty fast. But it's going to repeat the Heart Sutra 3 times using the Japanese pronunciation. So I'm going to put the Japanese pronunciation up on the screen. You should be able to see that now, I think. And then let me find the recording.
「
Okay, that was interesting. I thought. Anyway, I thought it's actually a good experience for me because I've been chanting the Heart Sutra in the Korean version that I've become accustomed to for like, 100 years, not quite 100 years, but, you know, over 20 years. And I forget how disorienting it can probably be to people who are completely new to it. Um, anyway, because that's the Sino-Japanese version, which is different enough that it throws me off. Anyway, so tonight we're going to be talking about the Heart Sutra again. We're specifically going to be talking about um, okay, the Heart Sutra is Heart Sutra is short for the Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. Hridaya meaning heart. And so tonight's topic is, what is it that the Heart Sutra is the heart of, which is Prajna Paramita. So before we start, does anybody have any questions about anything that's gone before in the class, or um, you know, Prajna Paramita? Because basically this is going to be a class on emptiness. In fact, it's worse than that. It's going to be a PowerPoint presentation on emptiness, which is one has to appreciate the humor of that. Okay, I think. Um, but if anybody wants to preemptively ask a question or say something, that would be totally cool. But maybe
Kurt, I will ask this.
go ahead, right ahead, go right ahead.
Hey, in the second part of the Heart Sutra, when it
Hmm.
says Avalokiteshvara
Hmm.
while practicing the
Hmm.
Prajna Paramita,
Hmm.
wanted to ask
Hmm.
you, because I
Yeah,
also got your email that
yeah.
sort of explained what is the Prajna
Well,
Paramita.
uh-huh.
So I wanted to ask, which one was he practicing?
Oh, that's a good question. So, um, so the real question is, how does one practice the Prajnaparamita, right? Or what is it that Avalokiteshvara is doing
Right,
while practicing
right,
Prajnaparamita? And I'm not going to answer that question, but so one can um, I think that there's only one way that you could do that, which is to, cultivate a real meditation practice, um, you know, and uh, uh, learn the Heart Sutra, recite the Heart Sutra, um, possibly focusing on the mantra, recite the mantra a lot, um, and then also, combine that with making some effort on your part to understand it. Not without being overly attached to intellectual understanding, but also, so it's an excellent way to cultivate don't know mind. um, Basically, any time that you really try to study and understand the teachings of the Buddha Dharma, uh, you will have don't know mind. And
right.
it's not like you sit down and you think, now I'm going to get don't know mind. It's like you will have don't know mind if you really try, if you really make an effort, um, to to find some real understanding. You will have don't know mind, and you will also succeed in having some understanding as well, at least partial understanding. A very important part of don't know mind is the keeping don't know mind even once you get something. you know that's probably the most important aspect of don't know mind, because it's when people get something, then they lose their don't know mind and say, I've got it. Anyway, so that anybody else want to take a stab at that? That's a great question. um, there's lots of ways to answer that. um, okay, so now I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can. First of all, I gotta find the button. Share screen button. Here it is. What you think of that answer, Joe? Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, all right. Thank you. Okay. So, yes. Let's see if I can get this to work. Now, I've been having a little bit of trouble with something has changed in the way that the PowerPoint does presentations. Presenter mode. Oh, good. Now it's working. All right. So, like I already said, what is the Heart Sutra the heart of? And uh, so the Heart Sutra is the heart of Prajna Paramita. So what is Prajna Paramita? So in the first class, this is, like I said, the third class in this series. Um, so that we're looking at different chants. The first chant that we looked at was what? Oh, the first chant that we looked at was the uh, I think we looked at the Jijang Bosal chant first, and then I think we looked at the Homage to the Three Jewels chant, and now we're looking at the Heart Sutra. I think that's the order in which we've gone. And this is the third class on the Heart Sutra. In the first class on the Heart Sutra, we looked at what is the Heart Sutra? Is it a sutra? What kind of a sutra is it? What does sutra even mean? Where does it come from? Not that we answered any of those questions, but we looked at them and looked at some kind of preliminary answers. In the second class, we looked specifically at the mantra. This very interesting mantra that comes along with the Heart Sutra that will also be a topic tonight as well. And then in this class, we are looking at what is Prajna Paramita, what is the Heart Sutra the heart of. And so there's at least four things. If anybody can think of another one, please let me know. But there's at least four things that Prajna Paramita means. First of all, it means the sixth paramita. Prajna Paramita is the sixth paramita. And we'll talk about that in a minute. What are the paramitas? And the sixth paramita is prajna, or wisdom. Prajna Paramita also refers to a large body of Buddhist texts that are called the Prajna Paramita Sutras. Prajna Paramita also refers to a very special, and we'll talk a lot about her later on, Bodhisattva named Prajna Paramita, a being named Prajna Paramita, who is the mother of all Buddhas. And of course, the Heart Sutra, the mantra in the Heart Sutra is in the Heart Sutra called Prajna Paramita. And so we'll talk about that as well. So first of all, the first thing is that Prajna Paramita is one of the paramitas. So sometimes it's said that there are 6 paramitas. Actually, in the fine print, often the the number of paramitas is filled out to 10 for a couple of different reasons. Also, in non-Mahayana Buddhism, in particular in the modern uh, modern day school of Theravada Buddhism, um, uh, which is, as far as I know, is the only uh, currently existing school of Buddhism that isn't a Mahayana school. But they also have paramitas, so they're called paramis, which is uh, the um, the Pali for paramita. Um, there's 10. There's 10 in Theravada Buddhism and 10 in Mahayana Buddhism. And the lists overlap. And this isn't a class in the paramitas, so I'm not going to go through all these. It's kind of nice to just look at these. Generosity and sila, or discipline, or conduct, or virtue, or morality, whatever you want to, whoops, uh, are the same in both lists. And then the lists kind of diverge a little bit after that. So you see, patience is the third paramita in Mahayana Buddhism. Patience is the sixth paramita in Theravada Buddhism. So, um, uh, uh, but what are these paramitas? The paramitas are the things that a Buddha practices. That is not so much a Buddha, but a being, a Bodhisattva, practices on the way to becoming a Buddha. And so in in the Pali suttas, uh, or in the Chinese agamas, I think they're called in Chinese, the Chinese version of the same basic teachings. Uh, you have the Jataka tales, which are past life stories of uh, Siddhartha. Before being born as Siddhartha, this being, this Bodhisattva, I had many hundreds of lifetimes, and in the course of those lifetimes, um, uh, this being who would become born as Siddhartha eventually, and in that lifetime would become Shakyamuni Buddha, lived many hundreds of lifetimes, over the course of which, um, what was he doing? He was working on the paramitas. All right. So the wisdom paramita, the sixth paramita, this is what Prajna Paramita is. All right. So now uh, I'm going to use a lot of quotes from different texts in this class. Um, and here's a good one. This is from a teaching, virtual teaching that the Dalai Lama gave not that long ago, a couple of years ago, on the Heart Sutra. The Buddha taught that suffering is to be known, and yet there is nothing to be known. Though it's, let me see if I can let me stop the. The Buddha taught that suffering is to be known, and yet there is nothing to be known. Though its origin must be overcome, there is nothing to overcome. While sensation must be achieved, there is nothing to be achieved. And despite the need to cultivate the path, there is nothing to be cultivated. He clarified that suffering, origin, cessation, and path have no independent existence. And if you're familiar with the text of the Heart Sutra in its various English translations, this sounds a lot like the kind of thing that the Heart Sutra says: no attainment and nothing to attain. Here's another teaching from the Dalai Lama on the sixth paramita, or in particular on what is very often considered to be the core of the sixth paramita, which is the Buddhist teachings on emptiness. Now, ultimately, all of our difficulties arise from one basic illusion. We believe in the inherent existence of ourselves and all other phenomena. We project and then cling to an idea of the intrinsic nature of things, an essence that phenomena do not actually possess. Let us take a simple chair as an example. Okay, so this is, we believe, without fully recognizing this belief, that there is such a thing as an essential chairness, a quality of a chair that seems to exist among its parts, the legs, seat, and back. In the same way, we each believe that there is an essential and continuous me pervading the physical and mental parts that make up each of us. This essential quality is merely imputed by us. It does not actually exist. Our grasping at this inherent existence is fundamentally mistaken, is a fundamentally mistaken perception that we must eliminate through meditation practices of the wisdom path. Now, this is actually kind of addressing Joe's question. How do because that's really, this is uh, uh, what Avalokiteshvara did, and this is what the Dalai Lama is recommending that one do. That we eliminate our mistaken possession through meditation practices on the wisdom path. Why? Because it is the root cause of all of our misery. It lies at the core of all our afflictive emotions. Oh, I like these. These are these pictures here. These are pictures of the Dalai Lama. He's not on Zoom. I don't think he's. I think he's just live streaming on YouTube. But let me. There he is, looking at a big screen, bunch of people. Basically, this is actual pictures of him when he was giving the teachings that I was just quoting from. Um, let me get out of this now. All right. Now, further, he says further, we can abandon this illusion of an essential quality only by cultivating its direct antidote, which is wisdom, the wisdom that realizes the non-existence of that quality. Again, we cultivate this profound wisdom as we cultivate humility in order to uproot our pride. We must first become familiar with the improper way we perceive ourselves and other phenomena. We can then cultivate a correct perception of phenomena. Initially, this perception will be intellectual. And this is kind of an important point to to recognize. So what the Dalai Lama is saying here is that there is a role. Now, the Dalai Lama comes from a tradition that is very heavily intellectual, very scholarly, very analytical, um, uh, and so one could potentially say that his approach is a little too much on this side. But I think that he actually has a good way of teaching that doesn't overemphasize the intellectual side of things, while at the same time still recognizing the fact that we need to use our minds. We should use our minds. We should be curious. We should be uh, 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 actively trying to understand to the best of our ability what this stuff is all about. Um, Even though uh, uh, at first we will only have an intellectual understanding. Uh, through study or listening to teachings. To deepen this perception requires more sustained meditation practice. Only then is the perception able to truly affect our views of ourselves and other things. By directly realizing our lack of an inherent nature, we uproot the very basis of the self grasping that lies at the core of all of our suffering. Developing wisdom is a process of bringing our minds into accordance with the way things really are. Through this process, we gradually remove the incorrect perceptions or of reality, that's a typo, we have had since beginningless time. This is not easy. Merely understanding what is meant by the inherent or intrinsic existence of things demands much study and contemplation. So just having an intellectual understanding itself is not easy. Recognizing that things have no inherent existence is a profound insight requiring years of study and meditation. Okay. So he's talking about what is Prajna Paramita? What is wisdom? Okay. Now, what difference does it make? And now he's addressing the question of what is the relationship between wisdom and compassion. Okay. According to Buddhism, compassion is an aspiration, a state of mind wanting others to be free from suffering. It's not passive, it's not empathy alone, but rather an empathetic altruism that actively strives to free others from suffering. Genuine compassion must have both wisdom and loving kindness. That is to say, one must understand the nature of the suffering from which we wish to free others. This is wisdom. And one must experience deep intimacy and empathy with other sentient beings. This is loving kindness. If we are to cultivate the deepest wisdom, we must understand suffering at its deepest, most pervasive level. In turn, freedom from that level of suffering is true nirvana, true liberation, the true state of cessation, freedom from the first level of suffering alone. Now, whoops, let me go back. Oops. Sorry about that. All right. So now he's talking about something that's I cut this quote a little bit short. This book isn't the only place we can find this. There's different levels of suffering. So, freedom from the first level of suffering alone, merely being free of unpleasant physical and psychological experiences, is not true cessation of suffering. So, if you can somehow manage to attain this, you might think, wow, that's pretty great, right? But actually, that's only the first level of suffering. Um, Freedom from the second level of suffering, um, the second level of suffering comes from the fact that everything is impermanent. So even if you have good things and avoid bad things, that won't last. So there's still impermanence. And then the third level of suffering is suffering that is caused by fundamental ignorance. And so the third and the deepest level of suffering, and the level of suffering that has to be eradicated in order to be truly free from suffering, that is genuine cessation, genuine liberation. Um, eh, the this this is actually a worthwhile book to read. Um, I like this quote, and I like this particular section of the book. It, it's actually not my favorite book on the Heart Sutra, but um, the Dalai Lama knows a lot more about the Heart Sutra than I ever will, so it's probably worth reading this. Um, and if you're interested in knowing what these different levels of suffering are, that's good. But here's the thing. Uh, how can you help others if you don't understand what helping others means? Who are the others that need to be helped? It's others who are suffering. Um, People who aren't suffering don't really need your help. If you try to help people, I mean, it's hard enough to help people when they are suffering. Okay, but if you try to help people who aren't suffering, then you're just sticking your nose into other people's business. But um, if people are genuinely suffering and you want to help them, well, unless you understand what actually causes suffering, uh, you can't help them. So this is very important. Um, a lot of times in Buddhist teaching, there's a great deal of emphasis placed upon compassion, and that's as it should be. But compassion without an understanding of what causes suffering and what alleviates suffering is just feeling sorry for people. It's like if you don't know how to swim, you can't save someone who's drowning. Um, and even if you do know how to swim, you have to be a very strong swimmer and you have to understand some really basic, important fundamentals of life saving. Otherwise, if you jump in the water to try to save someone who's drowning, you'll probably just end up needing a lifeguard yourself. Um, anyway, so compassion and wisdom are inseparable in the teachings of Buddhism, which is why the wisdom paramita, the Prajna Paramita, is fundamental. Now, uh, another name for emptiness is shunyata, and a really nice book that, in my opinion, does an excellent job of explaining a lot of basic Buddhist concepts, as well as telling us a lot about the history of Zen Buddhism in particular, is Barbara O'Brien's The Circle of the Way. Um, Now, so here's what she says about shunyata or emptiness. Shunyata, also spelled shunyata, or emptiness, is a major theme in the Prajna Paramita Sutras. That's what we're talking about. And it is often called the most misunderstood word in Buddhism. Off, so Barbara O'Brien, she has spent the last, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years or more, basically writing articles about Buddhism on the internet. And so she's encountered a lot of misconceptions about Buddhism as an occupational hazard, as someone who professionally writes about Buddhism on the World Wide Web. Okay, all phenomena are empty, the teachings say. What they are empty of is self-essence. Essence. To a point, this is not radically different. This is not a radically different teaching from earlier, that is, non-Mahayana teachings. Consider the chariot simile. So the chariot simile here is a lot like the chair. Remember the Dalai Lama started talking about the chair when he was trying to explain emptiness, and he said, "Oh, the chair has legs and a seat and this and that." Um, and this is actually a very ancient sort of analogy that's used in uh, Buddhism, and originally it was a chariot. A chariot. Okay, so if we disassemble this, and I'll talk more about Menander, who Menander is, and why his chariot is important. But if you take a chariot, for example, and disassemble it piece by piece and lay the parts in a pile one at a time, at what point in that process do you no longer have a chariot? Does it cease to be a chariot? If you're honest, you have to admit that this is a subjective judgment. Some might say that at the point that it is no longer drivable, when it doesn't function as a chariot any longer. Others might say that as long as you have the pile, all the pieces, and they're still together, that it's still, in some sense, a chariot, just one that has been taken apart. All right. Um, so what this means is that with the word chariot isn't always clear as exactly what it means. It's a concept. It is not an essence that resides in the physical parts of the thing that we call a chariot. Likewise, beings have no permanent essence of self that resides in their bodies. Theravada Buddhism does not disagree. Now, this kind of argument right here, this is not a slam dunk argument. You have to really kind of look at it for yourself, think about it, um, and make of it what you will. But it is a very traditional Buddhist argument, not because it completely answers the question, but because it helps us to look at the question in the right way. It helps us to think about it and to meditate on it, which is really the point. If you look at this and just look at the words and say, well, that doesn't quite answer it for me, that's correct. It doesn't. Um, Mahayana scholars have developed their teachings on emptiness from another doctrine called dependent origination or dependent arising in Sanskrit, whatever that is. This early teaching, so the teaching on dependent arising or dependent origination is not a Mahayana Buddhist teaching, but in Mahayana Buddhism, um, we make we get more mileage out of it, and we use it as a way of approaching the idea of emptiness. So this early teaching says that all phenomena are caused to come into existence by other phenomena. In the Pali Canon, that is in Theravada Buddhism, dependent origination describes how an individual creates suffering and remains stuck in the cycle of samsara. But from the Buddhist teachings on dependent origination, Mahayana developed a doctrine of the interexistence of all phenomena. Nothing exists separately and independently from everything else, and it was reasoned a thing that has no independent existence cannot be said to exist in and of itself. Now, the important here is that this is an argument about emptiness that uh, is not nihilistic or nihilistic, some people might say, because it says it is reasoned a thing that has no independent existence cannot be said to exist in and of itself. But then, as Barbara O'Brien now says below, we distinguish all phenomena by their relationships to other phenomena. They do not exist of themselves. However, it's also nonsensical to say that phenomena don't exist because there they are. So the things that depend upon each other do not have an independent existence because they depend upon each other, but they also exist. They have a real existence. So it's not a nihilistic teaching. All right. So it's pretty much impossible to talk about these things without eventually coming around to the idea of the two truths. All right. And the two truths are basically that uh, things exist, but they only exist in dependence on each other. From the question of existence and non-existence, non-existence came to the doctrine. Came to the doctrine of the two truths, which says that reality is both absolute and relative. In a relative sense, there are toasters and toasts, dogs and cats, people and petunias. In an absolute sense, nothing is distinguished. There is just boundlessness. All phenomena are expressions of that boundlessness. It's important to understand that both absolute and relative are true. Dharma students sometimes fall into the habit of thinking of relative reality as being false and absolute as being true. But in Zen, at least, it's understood that both absolute and relative are true and indivisible. One cannot be without the other. Together, absolute and real and relative make up the whole of reality. So in the Heart Sutra, it says no attainment and nothing to attain. It also says all Buddhas attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. So all Buddhas attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, one could say, is a relative truth. No attainment and nothing to attain, one could say, is an absolute truth. There's more than one ways of looking at that, but uh, uh, we don't, in the Heart Sutra, doesn't say that one is better than the other. It says that they're both true and both necessary. All right. Suchness, if there's a word that creates even more confusion in Buddhism than emptiness, it's suchness. Okay. Or sometimes called thusness, is a word that appears in the Pali Canon and is used by Theravadins. In both Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, it is understood that the true nature of reality is ineffable. It cannot be effed. It is beyond description and conceptualization. Suchness is a deliberately vague term to keep us from conceptualizing it. In Mahayana, suchness is identified with emptiness and with absolute and relative reality. The Lotus Sutra, composed in whatever, develop suchness further into a list of 10 suchnesses or aspects of suchness. In brief, the suchness of a thing takes in its form, its function, and all of its causal relationships. The 10th factor contains all the aspects coalescing into a seamless whole. For example, the suchness of a single sunflower takes in the sprout, the sun, the soil, the rain, the finch feasting on its seeds. It takes in all the sunflower that came before and all that come after, and all interconnecting phenomena. It takes in the entire cosmos through space and time, which is present in the sunflower. Oh, that's pretty cosmic, right? But it's also pretty basic Buddhist teaching, actually. Okay, so this is a good place to stop. We're going to take a 5-minute break now. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. Take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk more about emptiness and Prajna Paramita. Okay? Okay. Um, so that was Prajna Paramita as the Paramita of wisdom, which Paramita of wisdom is often associated with primarily with the realization of emptiness. But I hope I made it clear that realization of emptiness is not something that is purely, it's neither purely an intellectual thing, nor is it something that is uh, uh, in any way separable from the cultivation of compassion. In fact, it's quite necessary for the cultivation of compassion. Um, let's see now. I'm going to slideshow. Yep. All right. So now, the second thing that I said that Prajna Paramita is that it's a bunch of sutras. If anybody have any questions on emptiness, or y'all got that right? Yeah, yeah. All right. So Prajnaparamita also refers to the Prajnaparamita Sutras. Um, now, I just got an email from Camille, who's one of the people who's been participating in these classes, and she isn't able to come tonight. She's a scientist. She's doing science, and sometimes science runs late. But she said, "Oh, are you going to talk about Nagarjuna or Nagarjuna?" I'm never sure how to pronounce his name. Anybody here speaks Sanskrit fluently, or know which syllable the emphasis is supposed to go on in Nagarjuna? Anyway, um, I always say Nagarjuna, which is probably the Midwestern Hoosier way of saying it, or is it Nagarjuna? I don't know. But so traditionally, it's taught. Traditionally, I say, up until the modern time when people started getting more, I don't know what, anyway, but traditionally it's taught the Mahayana teachings, these Mahayana teachings, of which the Heart Sutra and the Prajnaparamita Sutras are a central part. They were actually taught by the Buddha. They were not and we're going to look at this idea in more detail. But that after the Buddha died, after his parinirvana, these teachings were forgotten. But then they were rediscovered by Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna was able to retrieve these teachings because the Buddha had the foresight to give these teachings to the Nagas. The Nagas are the snake people who live under the earth, and they are great treasure keepers. They are renowned for their ability to keep and protect their great treasures, and so um, the Buddha gave the Nagas these Prajnaparamita teachings and said, please keep these until this guy named Nagarjuna, who will be born several hundred years from now, and you can give them to him. And so the way the story goes further is that the Nagas generally do not like human beings, but they really liked Nagarjuna. And so what they did was they would not give Nagarjuna all of the teachings at once. So they made him come back several times because they really liked it when he came down to the Naga realm. Um, so over time, the Mahayana Sutras were revealed to Nagarjuna after having been kept in safekeeping by the Nagas for many centuries. Um, many modern scholars, and others with limited imaginations, I say somewhat half jokingly, insist that the Mahayana Sutras could not possibly have been taught by the Buddha because, Nagas don't really exist, and that they therefore must have been written much later. That is, that instead of Nagarjuna discovering the Prajnaparamita Sutras, he wrote them. He or people like him wrote them, but then put Shakyamuni Buddha's name to them and claimed that they were sutras. But so regardless of their origin, is generally accepted that the Prajna Paramita sutras. Now, there's more to the Mahayana sutras than just the Prajna Paramita sutras, but that these do appear to be the first ones that anybody knew about. Uh, And now here's Zen Master Sung San kind of telling the his version of the traditional way that this happened. Buddhism, and this is from his book Compass of Zen. Buddhism is just a name for the path of attaining our true selves and helping all other beings, but that is very difficult for many people. So the Buddha appeared in this world, got enlightenment, and taught us for 45 years. First, he taught Hinayana Buddhism, that is non-Mahayana Buddhism. He taught the Four Noble Truths, that all life is impermanent and therefore life is suffering, and how to get out of the suffering. He taught dependent origination and the practices of various insights. As his students' minds developed, he started to teach what came to be called Mahayana Buddhism. This is the path of emptiness. It is sometimes called the Great Bodhisattva Way. I vow not to enter the infinite stillness and bliss of nirvana until the last sentient being is released from suffering. That's the Bodhisattva way. And finally, when his students were completely ripe, so this is the third. So first there was Hinayana, right? Then there was Mahayana. That's the second. And finally, when his students were completely right, he taught Zen. All right. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I don't want to get too bogged down in his detailed. He tells the story of the Buddha holding up a single flower, which all Zen students know and which you can look up. All right, now, yeah, now he's kind of recapping a little bit. The Hinayana view calls this realm that we inhabit a suffering world. All life is suffering, and suffering is life, samsara. Hinayana Buddhist teaching explains that we are living in this impermanent world, this suffering world, and it shows how we can get out of it. The suffering world is created entirely by our own thinking. Through this teaching, we are shown how to go from this opposites world of life and death to attain the realm of the absolute, or nirvana. In nirvana, there is no life and no death, no coming or going, no up or down. It is a state of complete stillness and bliss. Attaining the completely void state of nirvana is the ultimate goal of Hinayana Buddhist teaching. Mahayana Buddhist teaching begins at the point of emptiness and non-self, where Hinayana teaching leaves off. It shows how we can begin with the experience of emptiness to attain complete world, what Zen Master Sung Song calls complete world. What is complete? And he goes on. So this is Hinayana. Again, he's doing this again. Hinayana, then Mahayana. I'm going to jump ahead. Okay. He goes through, and this is actually kind of a nice little explanation. Even once you attain this complete world of Mahayana Buddhism, the Buddha taught that we cannot stop here. Sugar is sweet. Everything is complete, just as it is. Everything is truth. The sky is blue. Sugar is sweet. The wind is blowing. The trees outside are right now. That is all truth. But we must take one more step. And this is one of the key teachings of Zen Master Sung San, really, in his long and very productive career as a teaching. One more step is necessary. How do you make truth function correctly and make your life correct? Another way of saying is, how do you help other sentient beings? So how do you make the connection between whatever kind of realization you may have attained and, what good is it? How does it help other people? Mahayana Buddhism means perceiving that all things are empty, and then from this fundamental experience of emptiness, attaining how this truth can help all beings, life after life. We sometimes call that great love and great compassion, or Deja, Bi, as we say in the Korean tradition. The great Bodhisattva way, from moment to moment, my life is only for all beings. Okay? Well, that sounds pretty good, right? But then what is Zen Buddhism? If this is Mahayana Buddhism, what is Zen Buddhism? Zen never talks about absolutes or opposites world. It doesn't try to explain emptiness, truth, or complete world. The practice of Zen never explains anything. Zen simply points directly at the mind, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, and then he starts hitting the table a lot and saying things like, just like this. Then he gets all Zen. So he's explained a lot of things. It's interesting. He spent several pages explaining Hinayana Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. But then he says, but in Zen, we never explain anything. Anyway, So it's like in the Heart Sutra when it says no attainment and nothing to attain, and then it says all Buddhas attain anuttara samyak bodhi. Um, there is a place for this kind of teaching of not explaining anything. There's also a place for explaining things. All right. So what Zen Master Sung San was talking about is what's often referred to as the three turnings of the wheel of the Dharma. Okay. So the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma is the early teachings that the Buddha gave early in his career as a teacher emphasized becoming an arhat and emphasized the teaching of no self. The second turning of the wheel of the Dharma uh, now says that arhatship. So arhatship is not being a Buddha. If you go back and you read the Jataka tales, if you go back and you read the very first Jataka tale, which is extremely interesting. In the very first Jataka tale, this being who would eventually become Shakyamuni Buddha, he had the opportunity to become an arhat, but he said, no, I want to become a Buddha, because if I become an arhat, then that's it. But if I become a Buddha, then I can help others to attain liberation. I don't want to just attain liberation for myself. Oops. Where am I? I want to become a Buddha and help others. All right. Um, so the second turn of the wheel says we should do that too. We should follow the Buddha's example from his very first from the very first time when he became a bodhisattva. We should be bodhisattvas too, just like the Buddha. We shouldn't just follow the teachings of the Buddha. We should follow the example of the Buddha and take the path to Buddhahood. Um, but then, what's the third turning of the wheel? Again, once you get to this point, it all sounds pretty good. So why does there have to be a third turning of the wheel? And then, just as Zen Master Sung San did in the quotes that I gave from the Compass of Zen, what people in different Mahayana Buddhist traditions generally say is, well, you have the first turning, which is, um, uh, the path of arhatship. The second turning, arhatship, which is basically enlightenment for oneself. The second turning is seeking enlightenment to save, to help others. The third turning, and then what generally happens is that various different Mahayana Buddhist schools say, "Oh, our school is the third turning of the wheel." So Zen Master Sung San said, "Oh, Zen is the third turning of the wheel." Tibetan Buddhists will say, "Oh, Tibetan Buddhism is the third turning of the wheel," um, and so forth. Those are the two main examples that you'll usually run into. But that's, I mean, on the face of it, that just sounds sectarian. It also sounds extremely convenient. Oh, my school is the third turning of the wheel of the Dharma, whereas the people down the street are saying that their school is the third turning of the wheel of the Dharma. So who's right? Um, Actually, it turns out that there's a more satisfying way of looking at it. There's a couple of different ways of looking at it that don't depend upon the sectarian differences between competing Mahayana Buddhist schools. Um, the first turning of the wheel, and this is what I'm saying down here is largely based upon the Lotus Sutra, um, uh, or at least one way of looking at the Lotus Sutra. The first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, there was one path and there was one teaching. There was a path to arhatship, and that was it. The teaching emphasized no self, for the Four Noble Truths, the 12 links in the chain of dependent origination, and there's no Mahayana. Uh, the second turning of the wheel uh, said that there were two paths and two teachings. It accepted this path to arhatship, and with its emphasis on no self and with its emphasis on individual liberation, but said, "Oh well, that's not really the best way. The best way is our way. The best way is the Bodhisattva way. The best way is Mahayana Buddhism." And so this kind of accepts the legitimacy of Hinayana, what is called Hinayana as a derogatory term, as a lower teaching suitable only for those of lesser capacity. Um, then what happens in the Lotus Sutra and in many of the later Mahayana sutras, which so the Mahayana sutras in general are believed to by those who accept the whole story with Nagarjuna and the Nagas and all that the Buddha actually taught these things. Um, Even once the Buddha began to teach the Mahayana sutras, there was an evolution, and the final stage of those teachings is where the Buddha kind of tied everything together and said that there is really only one path, and that is the path to Buddhahood. But there are many teachings, and the Buddha emphasized what he called skillful means. That for some people, it might be good for them to be on the path to arhatship. But really, even though they might be thinking that they're on the path to arhatship, they are really on the path to Buddhahood, because we are all on the path to Buddhahood. And so, by emphasizing or by claiming that we are all on the path to Buddhahood, um, this third turning of the wheel of the Dharma really revolves around the idea of Buddha nature. Buddha nature, which doesn't come up in the Heart Sutra at all, by the way. So, a way of kind of recapping that. First, there was no self. Then there was emptiness, and then there's Buddha nature. Um, Now, if Buddha nature is the ultimate, most advanced teaching, why not just dispense with the first two turnings of the wheel of the Dharma? A reasonable question to some extent, but without a grounding in the teachings of no self and emptiness, the teachings of universal Buddha nature by itself could easily lead to a sense of complacency. I have Buddha nature already, right? Um, it could even lead to a greater attachment to the idea of a real, fixed, separate self. Um, yeah. So, one way of understand. Oops, I did it again. I keep doing that. One way of understanding these three turnings of the wheel with respect to what does Buddhism teach about the mind is that the first turning of the wheel emphasizes everything that's wrong with our minds. Um, it basically says our minds are uh, impure and need to be purified. The second turning of the wheel, which is very much what the Heart Sutra represents, the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma. The Heart Sutra says right there, nothing is tainted or pure, including our minds. So, um, the third turning of the wheel says that everything, including our minds, is already pure and perfect and complete just as it is. Without the first turning, without the first two turnings of the wheel, it would be easy to conclude that we don't need to practice. So that's one of the reasons why we need the first two turnings of the wheel, even though the ultimate teaching is still um, the third turning of the wheel. The third turning, which does not belong to any one particular Buddhist Mahayana school. Um, anyway, okay, so I already did this, uh, didn't I? Yeah, right. Covered this already. The two truths such as. Oh yeah, but I didn't talk about the 10. Did I talk about the 10 suchances? I didn't, did I? Okay, all right. So this is there's two things that Barbara O'Brien mentioned in the that I talked about in the previous uh, first half of the class, and actually this is interesting, but it's not that interesting. Some people make a big deal about this. I'm not really sure why Barbara O'Brien put this in here, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, like when I saw this, I mean, some of us, a group of us, just finished reading the Lotus Sutra together. We spent months and months looking over it, going it over fairly slowly, talking about it at some length, looking at different translations, at different commentaries. I don't remember 10 suchnesses. Do you remember 10 suchnesses, Elizabeth or Deborah? Yeah. So, but they're there. Now, and so this is the story of King Melinda or Menander. Um, so this is a non-Mahayana Buddhist teaching. Um, Basically, uh, someone was trying to explain emptiness to King Menander or King Melinda, and Nagasena was his name, and he said, "How did you get here?" and then the king said he came in a chariot, and Nagasena, and then Nagasena went through the same thing that the Dalai Lama said, and that Barbara O'Brien said. Well, what if you take it apart? At what point is there no longer a chariot? Um, anyway, it's like I said, it's not a very conclusive answer to the question of what is emptiness, but it's an interesting way of thinking about it and working on it, basically. So this is the part of the Heart Sutra that we've been talking about. This is the part of the Heart Sutra that is taken right out of the Prajna Paramita Sutras. This blue part. This is a direct quote from one or more of the longer Prajna Paramita Sutras. And what are these Prajnaparamita Sutras? Well, Xuanzang, he's the guy whose version of the Heart Sutra we chant, whether you chant it in the Japanese style, the Korean style, or the Chinese style. And in Chinese, it could be in Mandarin or Cantonese or possibly other versions. Anyway, these are just some of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. These are the other ones that Xuanzang also translated into Chinese. Here's the Diamond Sutra. You might recognize the Diamond Sutra. And in what I'm going to talk about next, we will talk some about the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 verses. So the the last two parts of this class are on Prajnaparamita as this Bodhisattva, who is the mother of all the Buddhas. And let me just fast forward a little bit just to show you. Oh yeah, this this section of the presentation has quotes from this really wonderful book by Miranda Shaw, The Buddhist Goddesses of India. Oh, which I brought here as a I have a prop. Can you see my screen? Can you see me a little bit? Oh yeah, here it is. Here's my physical copy of it, which I've had for a long time. You can get it fairly inexpensively in paperback now. I bought it when it first came out in hardback, and okay, so I love this section of her book. Miranda Shaw has a lot of really interesting stuff in this book on the Buddhist goddesses of India. She has a chapter on Prithvi, who is the earth goddess that the Buddha called upon right at the very moment of his enlightenment when Mara was attacking him. She has a very nice chapter on Lakshmi, who most people usually think of as a Hindu goddess, but who's actually a very important figure in Buddhism. Um, anyway, and so she has this great chapter on chapter 8 on Prajnaparamita, and this is from the 8,000 line perfection of wisdom scripture. She is perfect wisdom that has never come into being and therefore never goes out of being. She is known as the Great Mother. She is the perfect wisdom who gives birthless birth to all Buddhas, and through these sublimely awakened ones, it is Mother Prajnaparamita alone who turns the wheel of the true teaching. So all those turnings of the wheel of the Dharma that we were talking about, the Prajnaparamita Sutra says that's all her, Prajnaparamita, um, the mother of all the Buddhas. All right, now Miranda Shaw goes on quite a bit about Prajnaparamita. She has a point to make, and it's a good point, because this everything that Miranda Shaw talks about in here, and that is in the especially in the 8,000 line Perfection of Wisdom scripture, which is one of the main Prajnaparamita sutras. You don't get this from the Heart Sutra. You don't get that there is this being, this wonderful being, Prajnaparamita, who is the source of all Buddhas. Um, and let's see what else it says. Oh, wait a second. I did it again. Down here. she, a lot of these are quotes from the 8,000 line Prajnaparamita Sutra, but also Miranda Shaw also kind of puts things into her own words. All who seek illumination must sit at her feet and drink from the stream of teachings that flow from her presence. Thus, Prajnaparamita is the ultimate source of refuge and object of reverence, for only those who prize wisdom above all else may attain it. Even Buddhas and Bodhisattvas pay homage to her because to her they owe their omniscience. To worship the Buddha, the relics of a Buddha, or a stupa, is to honor what she, that is Prajnaparamita, has brought into being. To revere her is directly to worship the source. Let's see. Yeah. I'll put this up here. Okay. So now she's talking a lot about the 8,000 line Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Although the work advances a systematic philosophical viewpoint, its language is redolent with poesy, devotion, and emotional fervor, as it celebrates the goddess and her namesake wisdom, that is Prajna. I would say also that Miranda Shaw's chapter on this is also redolent with poesy, devotion, and emotional fervor, but in a good way. She really gets across, I think, what why she's quite, uh, I would say, excited about talking about Prajna Paramita. Um, the central importance and cosmic status of the Wisdom Mother at her earliest appearance are surprising given the apparent swiftness with which she rose on the Mahayana horizon. So now she's talking about historically speaking. When the Mahayana teachings first appeared, which, regardless of how you believe that happened, whether you think Nagarjuna went into a cave and traveled down below the earth and met with the Nagas and brought these teachings back, or if you think that people just started making up new sutras. Um, uh, all of a sudden, not only were there these new sutras, there's this whole new being, this what Miranda Shaw refers to as a goddess, um, uh, who is actually a bodhisattva. Nothing in so there had been other female figures, great bodhisattvas, goddesses, etc., that had been important in Buddhism prior to the appearance of Prajna Paramita, but these were um, uh, tree spirits, Prativi, the earth spirit, Lakshmi that I referred to. But this, so tree spirits and Prativi and Lakshmi and these other examples, these were not viewed in nearly the way that Prajna Paramita is viewed. There is little in these goddesses of earthly providence, however benevolent and auspicious they might be, to foretell the radiant entity of pure spirit and wisdom that is Prajna Paramita. And so there is the goddess, like the philosophy with which she is associated, that is Mahayana Buddhism, appears to represent a revolutionary shift in Buddhist consciousness. Let's see. Okay, so here is a direct quote from the 8,000 line Prajna Paramita Sutra. The Buddhas in the world systems in the 10 directions bring to mind this perfection of wisdom as their mother, the saviors of the world who were in the past and also those that are now in the 10 directions have issued forth from her, and so will the future ones be. She is the one who reveals reality. She is the Genetrix, the mother of the victorious ones. All right. All right. Okay. So now, unfortunately, I've got to move on a little bit because there's still one more aspect of Prajna Paramita to talk about very quickly, the mantra. So the last class was on the mantra, so I feel okay going through this a little bit quickly. And I'm also using Miranda Shaw's book again, because she has some good stuff to say about the mantra. Um, in particular, she talks about how in this 8,000 line perfection of wisdom scripture, so that the 8,000 line scripture is one of the shorter Prajna Paramita sutras. It's considered like the go-to summary. Um, uh, and it talks about the Prajna Paramita mantra, but it doesn't tell you what the mantra is. And so what Miranda Shaw is saying is we don't really know for sure what mantra is being referred to, but it's reasonable to suspect that it is the mantra that was eventually revealed as the Heart Sutra mantra, Gate Gate Pada Gate Pada Gate Bodhisvaha. And let's see, where does she say? So here she talks about, these are quotes again from the sutra that talk about the protective powers of the of the Heart Sutra mantra. But then at the end, she kind of brings it all together. The Heart Sutra mantra is clearly attributed with tremendous practical and metaphysical efficacy. The material and spiritual benefits of its recitation are inseparable. For the apotropaic, there's a good word, apotropaic power of the mantra, it means protective. Ultimately derives from wisdom itself. Realization associated with the growth in wisdom confer a protective mantle of psychological insight and inner sense of security and safety. Wisdom unveils the illusory nature of the world and of the self, revealing that in reality there is no self to be harmed. One who attains non-dual insight will transcend the self-referential viewpoint that generates dualistic dramas and victimization, conflict, adversity, thereby removing its possessor from harm's way. All right, so yeah, we're going to have to stop. We're going to recite the Heart Sutra in just a second. This is just a little bit on, if you look through Xuanzang's Heart Sutra, look at the characters in it. It's interesting, I think, that mu and no and emptiness, so these are all kinds of negative things. Mu, not, and emptiness. And then also Banya Paramita. They actually want the Banya Paramita is repeated 6 times within the Heart Sutra itself. That makes up over a fourth of the whole sutra. But neither Ja or Bi, which are the 2 main characters used in Chinese to refer to compassion, neither of them appear anywhere in the Heart Sutra. Why? So I'm going to leave that as a question. We should recite the Heart Sutra now for closing. Oh, Hana has joined us. Hi, Hana. Wonderful. But questions, comments. If anybody thinks I got anything wrong about emptiness or the history of my, if anybody want to debate whether or not the Mahayana sutras were really taught by the Buddha and hidden under the earth for hundreds of years, we could talk about that. That's a very interesting topic, I think. Or maybe we should just recite the Heart Sutra. And one of the things that should come across is that reciting the Heart Sutra is good for you. It will help you to understand the teachings. Just the recitation of the sutra itself, especially with the mantra, helps us to better understand the teachings, and it's good for us. It's actually quite good for us. Okay, so now, having said that, let me see if I can find. Just give me 1 second. I should have had this ready, but what are you going to do? Okay, good. Okay, now we will recite the Heart Sutra. This will be the one that you might be more familiar with, the Sino-Korean, the Korean version. Thanks for coming, everybody. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Kurt.